Okay, is everyone ready?
Yeah. Let's go.
Ready.
Ready.
All right. Okay. Welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and my co-host is Janet Coursey. The topic of today's show is how do trade publishing, vanity press, and self-publishing differ. Our guest for today's show is Mitchell Fron and Gregory A. Kompes. Before we get to our guest, my panel and I would like to read a few fun
Quips.
quips. And Jan, I'm going to let you start. I'll get it together here in a minute. Go ahead, Jan.
I'm going to start without you.
All right.
Hey, I'm like a big old hen. I can't cluck too long about the egg I've just laid because I got 5 more inside of me just trying to push to get out. That's by Louis L'Amour. And an added fact about Louis L'Amour. At the time of his death, almost all of his 105 existing works, 89 novels, 14 short stories, and 2 full-length works of nonfiction were still in print. And I know somebody who's a big Louis L'Amour fan who'll be very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
And here's a quote from Christopher Hampton. Asking a working writer what he thinks about critics is like asking a lamppost how it feels about dogs.
All right. And Mitchell,
Yes.
would you like to read a quote there?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, I would. I think you get your facts first, and then you may distort them as you please. I think Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain, said that.
That's right. And here's one for you. Write a wise saying, and your name will live forever. That's anonymous. All right.
I wrote that.
You wrote that?
That wasn't anonymous.
If you are just tuning in, you are listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, along with my co-host, Janet Coursey, and our guest for today's show, Gregory A. Kompes and Mitchell Fron. The topic of the show is how do trade publishing, vanity publishing, and self-publishing differ? Our first guest is author Gregory Kompes. His latest book is titled Tamberlane. Mm-hmm. It's a Broadway revival. And Gregory is an adjunct professor for English composition at the Nevada State College in Henderson, Nevada. In addition to being a writer and author, you're also a writing teacher and coach. Gregory holds a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from National University in La Jolla, California, and a Master of Science in Education from California State University, East Bay, California. A certificate from Online Teaching and Learning at California State University, East Bay, Cal, and a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from Columbia University in New York. You've written over 34 pieces, and there are far more accolades that I don't have time to mention, so I'm just going to defer to your website, which is GregoryAKompes.com, and that's GregoryAKompes.com to learn more. So tell us a little bit about Tamberlane, and then I believe Jen has a few questions for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's great to be here again. You guys do a great show, so it's fun to be on.
Thank you.
Tamberlane is the third in my Broadway series, and they all stand alone, though, as individual novels. And it's about a drag queen, Christopher Marlowe, who's kept the bar Tamberlane, which is a New York City drag bar. He's kept it open on a promise, and he meets a new guy, and things start to change, and then there's success again for Tamberlane, and then someone tries to kill Christopher Marlowe again and again and again.
All right.
I was taken by this book, and no holds bar. It was wonderful. It taught me something very, very important, and that is get out of your comfort zone. Stop reading I was just really kind of big into romance novels. This took me away. It showed me a whole different array of entertainment that I didn't realize was out there. And I fell in love with Christopher Marlowe. I got to tell you, if he was alive today, I'd be one of his best friends. So I just want to know, there's some things in this book that just were so interesting. And one of them is a hidden passageway. Where did you come up with an idea like that? And your main character, how he got his name. Specifically, give me a reason why you gave him that name, because that is so intriguing to me. And how did you come up with the idea of the attempted murders and the guy who does it?
Well, I'm glad you liked the book. Thank you so
I'm
much.
over the top in love with it.
I love this book too, and I love this character. And it was actually really hard to finish the book because I didn't know how it ended while I was writing it, and I didn't know what was going to happen to the main character, whether he was going to survive all these murder attempts or not. Which is one of the reasons I think the twists and turns work so well, because even I, as the author, didn't know what was going to happen. And it was hard to finish because I didn't want to let go of Christopher Marlowe. He's just a great character.
Yes.
The hidden passageways, there are, the book is set in New York City in an older section of not quite southern Manhattan, but sort of in a made-up couple of blocks that would be around the old meatpacking district on the west side. That's where it's basically set. Which the book talks about, the memory of the blood in the streets, because that's how the afternoons used to be in the meatpacking district.
Right.
And so that's sort of where the setting came from. I lived a few blocks from there when I lived in New York City, and it was a great place to wander, especially at night. Anyway, we'll save those stories for another show. But the hidden passages comes from, there are all of these passageways in New York City. There are all these tunnels and all kinds of places that the average folk don't know about. And sometimes you move into a building and you discover there's a connection between your building and another building, or your building and the building across the street. I stretched it just a little bit, but that's where one of the places it comes from. Yeah.
I had a feeling it actually was a real thing.
Yeah, it was a real, especially part of Tamber Lane. Tamber Lane had been around the bar for a long time, and it had been speakeasy for a number of years.
Yes.
So part of the use of the tunnel was another way
people
into
out.
the club, or a way to get people out, and hookers also out. So not in this version of Tamber Lane, but in a past version of Tamber Lane. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So I can't tell you where the character name came from. It is based loosely on a very rough idea of the actual Christopher Marlowe, the playwright from the 17th century. It is roughly based on that. Some of the names and things within the novel are based on Christopher Marlowe's life. And Tamber Lane, of course, was his most famous play, surviving play. He wrote a lot of plays, but it isn't. I can't tell you where it came from. I truly can't. It was a moment, and I went, "Oh yeah, that's it."
Oh, that's interesting.
So,
yeah.
yeah. I trust those moments. As a writer, you have to
Right.
You have to write. You have to go with them.
Yeah. So, Greg, where can we learn more about your work? Because I know you have a ton of books out there.
Well, my website is always a great place to get more information. Gregory at Kompes.com or Kompes.com. Either one will get you there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. Some of my books end up in bookstores and libraries. So stuff's all over the place.
Very cool.
All right, and I just want to mention to the listeners, it's not a coincidence that both you and Mitchell are on the show today, because you both have been traditionally published as well as self-published, and that is the topic of the show once we've introduced you. So I'm going to introduce our next guest. That's Mitchell Fron. Mitchell Fron is a pseudonym and he's a former assistant district attorney for a major American city. He is a retired law professor at a major law school where he taught advanced legal writing for 20 of his 25 years at that school. Mitchell is the author of 2 trade published books on law and 1 Vanity published book on astrophysics, which is still selling after 13 years, and the author of 1 self-published novel, Dying to Save America, which is sold on Amazon. In addition, Mitchell is the author of about 20 published or perished scholarly articles on law. His other interests include aviation, astronomy, and photography. Mitchell, please give us a brief synopsis about your latest work, Dying to Save America.
Well, Dying to Save America is my first novel, actually. And
we need to stress that it is a fictional novel.
It is a novel. It is my first novel. The other books I wrote were on law and astronomy or astrophysics. The book Dying to Save America, I assumed when I wrote it that Congress would not fix Obamacare, and that when patients who could have been cured start becoming terminally ill in the future because of a doctor shortage and delays in the system, some are going to rebel. This is an action-packed novel set in the future. A man in Chicago who spotted a malignancy early enough to have had a 97% chance of cure was delayed for so long in getting treatment that he became terminally ill. He knows he soon will die and decides to take his congressman with him. He assassinates the poor congressman, but first mails letters explaining to the news media why he is doing so. His death spawns an epidemic of copycat killings of congressmen, senators, and federal judges by other dying patients. The book concludes by showing readers what they must do to peacefully escape the outrages of a broken system.
Ooh.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you published on June 2nd of this year, and you predicted predicted defeat of the effort to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. How could you have known this was going to happen?
How could you not have known? The Democrats aren't going to support anything the Republicans do, and they have party discipline to enforce that. Recall what happened to the senator from Connecticut, I'm trying to think of his name, who dared oppose the Democrats on one issue. And it was an issue where he felt what the Democrats wanted him, he was a Democratic senator, what his party wanted him to vote for would be damaging to Israel. And this particular senator was Jewish, and he voted against it. They got him a primary opponent in the next election. They funded that primary opponent, and they made sure that senator would not return to...
So basically, a lot of your predictions are pretty much based on what you foresee for the way the political spectrum is out there right now.
Now, the Republicans don't have that party discipline. A Republican senator is free to vote his or her conscience. And when you've got 52 Republican senators, you can't afford to lose more than two of them.
Yeah, okay.
And we just saw that.
People like Susan Collins of Vermont and others, I just figured they would never get it together, and no Democrats, no matter how good the proposal, would come over and side with them.
Well, I want to point out that in Dying to Save America, which is a fictional story, and keep in mind it was just published June 2nd of this year, you predicted an attack on the life of a congressman. The attempt on Congressman Steve Scalise's life occurred nearly 2 weeks later on June 14th. Do you believe this was a premonition or something you just calculated from what you've just been telling us?
Or a happy
I
accident.
just postulated it because the thing has all the makings of what it takes to go violent. And it's purely a coincidence that it happened that early. I didn't expect it to happen that early.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. In the book, you have characters assassinating members of Congress. How does that differ from Kathy Griffin's holding up a bloody effigy of President Trump's decapitated
President
head?
Trump is a real living human being. And to hold up an effigy approving the assassination of a person, not even the president, just Joe Citizen, is criminally actionable and a grounds for an excellent lawsuit against whoever did it.
And you are a law professor.
Right, and that could be a lawsuit. But my characters are all fictitious.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
It's set in the future. All active characters. Now, we can't discuss Obamacare without mentioning President Obama, for example. But he's in the book's past. And he's not an active character in the book.
Okay.
Every active character is fictitious.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that's what people need to keep in mind, that regardless of what party you side with, this is a fictional book.
And also bear in mind that I'm not advocating the killing. In fact, my dedication dedicates the book to those patients who are denied the best medical care because of government incompetence, and it is equally dedicated to those in law enforcement tirelessly working to protect public officials. Every assassin or would-be assassin in the book is apprehended, and in the after the final chapter in the book, I have an author's note that makes it very clear that I do not approve of violence. I disapprove of it. And I think it's wrong, and I'm hopeful the matter can be fixed
Right.
before it turns violent in this manner.
All right. And in the past, you've written, nonfiction. So how does the methodology you use to write your fiction book differ from writing nonfiction?
Well, in nonfiction, for me at least, it's a lot easier because you know exactly the points you've got to cover. And you make a list of those points, you break them into chapters, and you know what you're going to say. You know exactly what you're going to say. In a novel, it being fictitious, there'd be a much greater chance for writer's block. You know what a particular chapter is going to want to say. You know, for example, that in chapter 4, you've got law enforcement's response to the first killing, and you can talk about how they met, but you have to put in things like, and this comes off the top of your head as you're writing it, the employee who brings coffee in for all the officers, that kind of stuff. And similarly, in even the first chapter in which Hugh O'Neill discovers he has been given a few weeks to live, and he has cancer that could have been cured if he hadn't been delayed so much in getting treatment. We've got to have him talk about how he went to the dermatologist, the drive that he took, what was on his mind, and that's done pretty much off the top of the head.
Yeah.
You have a much shorter list of points you want a particular chapter to cover, and you've got to fill that up with matter that is relevant and entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever find that any of your characters ever said something other than what you were thinking at the time?
No, I never had a character say something. Well, that's really having living characters dancing around.
And that is an
That's
interesting
my
question.
life.
Yeah.
That's my life.
Yeah, and I write that way too. I allow my characters to,
Have their own thinking.
Right. They take me on a journey. I sort of watch them and follow them. I agree with Mitchell. Boy, nonfiction is so much easier to write. You develop your outline and you write your 3,000 words per chapter, and it's easy.
Yeah.
It's you find your good voice and you just work within your topic. So I agree with that.
Nonfiction is easier.
Yeah. And it's easier to sell
easier
too.
to get published because the first book I wrote was one on self-help in law.
Okay.
Okay, how to do something. It isn't Dacey's How to Avoid Probate, but it's a book of that type,
Okay.
that genre. And I went to New York to find a publisher, and I checked into the Pierre Hotel, which was at the time the most expensive and luxurious hotel, thinking New Yorkers are very address-conscious, and if I left a call back to the Pierre Hotel, I'd get calls back. And I did, and it was a day when there was transit strike on, and people were sitting around the office twiddling their thumbs with incomplete staff.
Oh.
And I talked to somebody at a major publisher, said, "Can I come over and see you?" He said, "Sure, come." He had nothing better to do that day. I walked in and sold him the book. The second book,
Wow.
That was
Yeah.
too easy.
that was too easy. The second book, I had to shop around with, and I didn't get an agent, but I'd have to shop for an agent if I did that, and then have the agent shop for a publisher and take rejection after rejection after rejection. And that would take a long time.
Right.
By the time your book comes out, it's a year later. Well, that clearly won't work for Dying to Save America, which is relevant to current day topics.
Yeah.
True.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well,
And with self-publishing, there is no delay. And with Vanity publishing, there is a much shorter delay. It's somewhere between trade publishing and self-publishing.
we're going to really get into all this, but I want to know from you, do you have a follow-up to this book you just wrote?
Not at the present time. I've got to see what happens. I've got to see what happens.
So where can we learn more about Mitchell Fronchen?
You can learn more about the book on Fronchen, that's FRONCHEN.com.
Okay.
Foxtrot Romeo, Oscar, November, Charlie, Hotel, Echo, Lima.com. And, of course, you can get the book at Amazon.com
Okay.
at a very reasonable price. It's dying to save America.
Well,
That sounds interesting.
yeah.
Very.
Well, now it's time to discuss the topic of today's show. And I got this idea from Mitchell, actually. How do trade publishing, vanity publishing, and self-publishing differ? And when we were talking on, I spoke to you a couple of days ago, and this is one of the things you wanted to talk about. I thought, well, I'll bring in Gregory Kompes because he, like you, has done everything. He's done traditional, some vanity press type.
I've never done actually vanity, but I've done traditional and self-publishing, and I've also published other people.
Yeah, so you were kind of a vanity press in a way.
No, we were a mid-size publisher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Specifically of anthologies. We were doing a very specific project. But
Well, I'm going to read this a little bit here, and then we're going to talk about trade publishing, and then we'll go into the others as well. Trade publishing is what most people think of when they think of books and publishing. They are the big companies like Hachette Book Group, HarperCollins, Macmillan Publishers, and Penguin Random House. Vanity publishing refers to companies like Ex Libris, iUniverse, Author House, Durant's, and a dozen more. You can self-publish through Amazon for free, and my panel and I are going to discuss each of the areas of publishing and how it works and what might best work for you, because people need to understand, if you can't get a traditional publisher, there are other ways of going out there. So we're going to talk about this now, and I'd like to start off to talk about traditional publishing. And traditional publishers are sometimes they're kind of a risk taker because you're going to have to send query letters out. Sometimes they require you have an agent or a manager. And Greg, we talked about this a little bit before we went on air. And Mitchell, I want your input on this as well. Even the traditional publishing is changing from what it was just a few years ago. And what I want to compare this to is what we're talking about when it comes, like, for instance, the bookstores. We had Borders and Waldens that went under because they weren't changing with the times per se. Right. And even now with Barnes and Nobles, they have to stay on top of what's happening now with ebooks and get online with the internet selling. And traditional publishing is starting to change as well, in that now you don't just query them. Oftentimes they're out there looking for self-published authors and seeing what they're doing, and they actually will approach those self-published authors. So I want your experience with traditional publishing. You gave us a little bit just now, Mitchell, in the sense that you actually walked into an office and they took your first book. On the second one, what were they requesting of you to get that second book?
Well, on the second one, I did not use an agent.
Okay.
I shopped it around and probably took about 6 months of running it from one publisher to another before I got a bite.
Even though you had already been traditionally published?
Even though I'd already been traditionally published, and my first book did pretty well.
Okay.
Mm.
And then, of course, they run the manuscript past an expert to get a second opinion on whether what I say about law is correct.
Okay.
And then begins the editing process. So from the time I complete the manuscript till the time the book hits the streets, it's over a year.
Yeah. And that's normal.
Yeah, up to 18 months, 24 months, sometimes in advance. Yeah.
So that's one huge difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing.
Right. Well, there's a lot going on in the traditional house, so it does take some time. There's several layers of editing. There's several layers of feedback. There's planning and prep.
Like what Mitchell just said, fact-checking.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. There's also the one thing that the traditional publishers build into their schedule, which I think more indie publishers should begin building into their schedule, is an advance time. There are lots of places where you can't get reviews, traditional style reviews, without a 3 or a 6 month advance time.
Okay.
So the reviewers need the books, for example, at the New York Times, which are now starting to review some indie published books. The LA book section is starting to do that. Some other magazines, they need 3 or 6 months because they don't want to review your book after it's been published. They want to be prepared so the review comes out around the same time as your publishing date. And the only way to do that is to back up your schedule.
And what is the reason for that?
It just takes them a while to get
because
through the
so
stack
many,
of books because they have so many and the editorial that goes on. So it's a vetting process, and you can. So it's just part of the planning when you indie publish, of making sure you get your book into reviewers' hands if you want that level of review, which is always very good. So it's just so that there's some things there. Some
What is
backup
your
things.
experience with a traditional publisher?
So mine is pretty amazing. I got the agent and the gig first, and then I wrote the book proposal.
Okay.
It came from a friend. A publisher, Career Press, was looking to add a new book to they have a 50 Fabulous series, which they haven't updated in a number of years, but 50 Fabulous Places to Retire, 50 Fabulous Places to Raise Your Kids, and so on. So they wanted to add a 50 Fabulous gay-friendly places to live.
Okay.
At the time, this was around 2004, 2005. Gay works were just becoming published by mainstream. There was a transition happening, so they wanted to add that. So a friend of mine had an agent who was looking for an author who would be willing to write the book to add.
Okay.
So that's how I.
So you really got lucky.
Really got lucky. I had taken a class with Eva Shaw, and it was an agent friend of hers.
Okay, but I need to ask you this, because if you were traditionally published, the first time,
Yeah.
How difficult was it for the next book, or was it easy?
Well, so I wrote the book. I still had to write a book proposal,
Okay.
Which is what you have to do with most nonfiction works, how-to books, and so on. So I wrote the book proposal. It was rejected, but I had the opportunity to write it again because they had sort of changed the view of what they wanted the book to be about in the middle. So I rewrote the book proposal. Like they wanted it well, anyway, we don't have to get into the details of that, but they wanted something different.
Okay.
So I rewrote the book proposal, and they accepted it. And then I had 6 months to write 120,000 words.
Okay.
And I got an advance, and that was great. And then the book got published. So then the publisher actually came to me with asking for new ideas for additional books that were gay themed that they could publish. But I didn't have enough. They were looking for gay law. They were looking for other things that I didn't have the credentials, in my opinion, to write. So I could have, if I had been a lawyer or an accountant or a different profession than a writer, I probably could have written several more books for that publisher.
Okay.
Because they were specifically looking for that.
All right. And Mitchell, I'm just curious, on your end, when you went with the second book, did you have to have a proposal, or how did you go about?
No, I finished the manuscript, actually.
Okay.
And I don't have trouble getting a book published on how to do something in law.
Okay.
This is something that a person out there might want to do.
Okay.
I haven't published books on, but how to beat a traffic ticket, how to, how to form a corporation. There are all kinds of how-to books you could do. And as a lawyer and law professor, I don't have any credentials problem, and I can write pretty well, having taught advanced legal writing for 20 years.
Right.
On the other hand, when I got into astrophysics, which is a hobby of mine, and I'm pretty well qualified, but no trade publisher is going to touch me because I'm not a professor. They don't want a law professor writing books on astronomy.
Okay.
Never mind that
Right.
Edwin Hubble, after whom the Hubble telescope is named, the first man to discover that there's a whole universe out there, not just our Milky Way galaxy, but billions of other galaxies. He was a lawyer.
Okay.
Oh.
But in any event, no trade publisher is going to touch me, so I went the Vanity route. It's a little bit quicker, but they still edit your book, but they'll publish just about anything you want
Right.
if you pay them.
Right.
And I have actually made a small amount of money, not enough to feed a family, but a very small amount of money off the book that I wrote.
Okay. And that was through the astrology book was through Advantage Press or traditional?
No, the Vanity Press.
Vanity Press. Okay.
Vanity Press.
Okay. So you really have done all three. And the reason I want to talk about Vanity Press, because we know traditional publishers, they basically, you have to submit queries. They find you that way. Now they're actually finding people online who have a success rate of selling, something like 2 million copies of a book. We actually have 3 authors that I'm going to mention right now who have actually sold a tremendous amount of book. Amanda Hawking, I've spoken about her many times on this show. She made over $2 million publishing on her own with ebooks. And then in 2011, St. Martin's Press finally noticed her. Now you keep in mind this woman was selling 9,000 books per day before they noticed her. Okay,
Right.
yeah, 9,000 per day. And then they finally made a contract with her for $2 million for 4 books. And they actually picked up one of her trilogies, and it's actually being made into a film now, or it's being adapted. So that's one success story. Now, but keep in mind, here again, these are traditional publishers who picked these people up who were self-published. And then you have Hugh Howey, who wrote the Wool trilogy. He wrote 9 books. He eventually was picked up by Simon & Schuster. But the one that we were talking about before we went on the air, and I don't know, Mitchell, how you feel about this one, but 50 Shades of Grey, E.L. James, she was actually out there with the fan fiction sites. Greg, you were talking about that a little bit, and how, and that book, it really was scrutinized. I mean, it was poorly written. Clearly, it didn't stop millions of people from wanting to buy it. And that's why she got noticed. It didn't matter that it wasn't edited that well or that the content itself wasn't that great.
Right, there was a following, and I think that's true in almost all. If you have a following, if you have a platform, if you have readers, especially if they're in the tens of thousands, in this case hundreds of thousands of readers, of course a traditional publisher is going to look at you because that's selling books, and so everybody makes money in that process. The Martian is another great success story. That was started as a blog.
Right.
And then evolved into an iTunes ebook, and then evolved into a traditionally published book because of the following. But it was all these steps along the way to building platform, and it's something a lot of authors miss. It's one of those pieces that can be so hard, but we have to develop platforms. And if you have a platform, you get to be published however you want to be published.
Well, and so we're going to talk about the self-publishing angle because it is interesting how things are changing now to where you can get noticed through self-publishing. There was over 300 titles published a day in the United States, okay? So you realize that you're really up against a wall there. And Mitchell, I would like to talk a little bit about what you're doing to go out there and get this new book that you have in the public's eye. What are you doing? I know I found you through a PR person, but what are you doing to go out there and push this book?
Other than, well, first of all, but the smallest of them is hand promotion. That is to say, I had some business cards made up. I'll give it to every waitress at a restaurant I go to.
Okay.
I'll give it to everybody.
Great idea.
But that's insignificant. I hired a public relations firm, and they are promoting the book.
Okay.
Trying to get me radio interviews and that kind of thing. And I'd like to get it mentioned, the book mentioned on the news favorably or unfavorably. But the failure of Congress to act has even prompted the novel. The name of the novel is Dying to Save America, available at Amazon.
Right, and you know what you just said is key, whether it's good or bad.
Either on Fox News or MSNBC or anywhere, whether they like it or hate it.
Right.
If they just talk about it, that would help.
Right. You almost want them to talk about it in a negative way because it's still getting you the publicity to want people to want to read why. What is the problem with this book? So you do kind of want to create both sides of the spectrum.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And now the book on astrophysics I promoted by having a website.
Okay.
When my first 2 books, trade published, were written, there weren't websites. It goes back quite a few years.
Right.
But I sold that only by my website, and it seems to be working.
Oh.
But Dying to Save America had to get right out, and the only way to get your book right out there is self-publishing through Amazon.
Yeah,
right.
Yes.
It's
That'll
amazing.
get your book right out there immediately, and with a hot issue like this. I mean,
Right.
if 3 months before the election you write a book predicting whether Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump will win, you might sell a few copies, but the day after the election, you
You're
can
done.
trash
Yeah.
any, okay? And I don't want my book to become like that, so I wanted to get it out there as soon as possible, and I'm just getting rolling now on promoting it.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So, but that's how I'm promoting it, through a paid public relations agent. Now, the Amazon people will edit your book for a fee if you want it.
Right.
I don't feel I need an editor. I think with all the teaching I've done on advanced legal writing, I can pen a book and not make grammatical and spelling errors and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I can avoid the legal problems that would be in the book if I were to mention real names on some of this stuff.
Right. I'm curious about the editing part, and I have a reason for asking you this. So I know with your degrees you had to have dissertations or you wrote essays. Did anyone ever edit any of those?
Every law review article I've written, which is publish or perish stuff, professors are expected to write if they're published in scholarly publications, and nobody reads them. And
There may
they
be
look
some
them over,
students
but they do
assigned to
minimal
read them.
editing. They do some editing, not nearly as much as a trade publisher would do of a book.
Right.
I mean, they respect your right to say, but they're going to check out. Usually students will do the checking.
Okay. And that's what I wanted to ask you with your new book. Has anyone critiqued it in a way that has caused you to make any changes? Or I know it's new. I mean, it literally just came out just a month or so ago. But, has there been any feedback on the editing aspect of it? I have a reason for asking you that.
The only change I made was in the description of the book.
Okay.
To clarify it. And the nice thing about self-publishing is you can go in and change a few words in your book anytime you want.
Right. That's the great thing about self-publishing.
Oh, yeah. That's
I mean, you literally can
great.
upload that file, and 24 hours later, that error has been corrected.
Yeah,
the
book's rewritten.
Yeah. So you're right.
Absolutely.
That is great. Because I actually have interviewed people on air who have been traditionally published, and I'm not mentioning any names because I don't really care, but I happened to read a book that was traditionally published, beautifully packaged, and on the first page there was an error. Yeah. And it did come to my attention. So you're right in that the great thing about self-publishing is you can correct anything immediately. So if it's only been out there and a few people have read it, yeah, they're going to know, but nobody else is going to know.
Right. Well, and that's the other advantage is that you're working, when you're self-publishing, especially through Amazon, you're working on print on demand. So there isn't a warehouse full of books with that mistake in them either.
Right, right.
The next you correct it, and then the next book that's ordered and printed, the correction's been made. So that's
No, you're only able to sell on Amazon, but they're 50% of the book market, I believe.
Yeah.
They're a high percentage of the book
they're actually
market.
almost 80 now. They're 79% of all books sold in America are from Amazon. Yeah.
Well,
You know,
they're huge.
America's where you're going to sell a book on an American issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the most part, yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting though how this whole thing you just mentioned has changed. Because when I published my first book in 1995, and I know Mitchell, you've published several books, so you can attest to this. I had to publish a large quantity. You couldn't order print on demand, so you had to order a large quantity. Now, if you're traditionally published, your publisher took care of it. But in my case, I self-published, and I had to order like 5,000, 2,000 or 5,000. I mean, you had to do a huge quantity
to get the price
the price down.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And if there's errors in that book, which there were, guess what? They're in every one of those copies you're going to sell.
But and I'll just say, I mean, I'm a big fan of editing and critiquing and getting feedback. I'm huge part of my writing career involves that. But it doesn't matter. There's still going to be mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, my first book went through at least four rounds of edits. And there are mistakes, and they make me cringe. They're little grammatical things, little moments.
But know they're there.
But I know they're there, and every once in a while a reviewer would mention something that's like, I know we can't change it anymore. It's the way it is. This was.
Well, the reason I asked Mitchell about his experience with the editing and whether his new book had been edited other than through him is I have a friend who had 2 masters and went on to get a PhD in the English language, and he actually hired an editor for his dissertation. And the reason he did that is because dissertations can be huge. And he was so afraid, your eyes start to cross after a while when you're writing and rewriting. And he was so afraid, what if I missed something? Mm-hmm. And that was the real reason why he hired an editor. I don't think there was hardly anything that was touched.
That makes sense for a dissertation. Absolutely. I didn't feel I needed it for this book.
Okay.
I want to say, in writing a novel, the methodology I used.
Okay.
I took an existing successful book, Stephen King's It.
Okay.
I like it because each chapter is devoted to a different person, and then they all come together at the end.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I wanted, with different victims of bad medical treatment.
Uh-huh.
Now, the first character takes up 3 chapters
Okay.
before he makes up his mind that he's going to kill his congressman.
Okay.
But it goes through the whole thought process and so forth. Then he's apprehended. It says, what the heck, I've only got a couple of weeks to live anyway.
Yeah.
And he mailed out letters to the news media, and that got national coverage, and it spawned some others. The second man takes up 2 chapters.
Okay.
And then after every assassin, there is a meeting of law enforcement in which they discuss what to do about it. And we go through about, I think, 5 or 6 persons who are attempting to assassinate.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them fails.
Mm-hmm.
And now they don't meet up at the end unless they meet in jail.
Uh-huh.
But although one of them says he's going to go to hell, but at least he'll get to meet. George Bush,
Okay.
Hillary Clinton when she gets there. Names several Republicans and Democrats.
Okay.
And at the conclusion, then it turns into what can be done to get out from bad medical care without killing your congressman.
Right. Yeah. But the point is that you didn't feel you needed an editor for this portion. And, I like it. But there's a lot of people who do this. There are a lot of people who go out there and instead of actually hiring an editor, they'll actually go out there and find a friend who's a teacher or a professor somewhere. And I did that. I'll be honest with you. I did that with one novel. The problem is I still had errors in the book, kind of like what Greg said. So, it is great that you feel confident with that. And I have no doubt, I'm sure, I have not read the book yet. I've only seen excerpts from it. I actually have it but I haven't had a chance to read it all yet. I just got it. But, it is good to have that confidence. And you have a degree, and as well as Greg. But my point is sometimes you still need someone to just...
I would never publish anything without having it edited.
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't. No, I'm a professional writer. And as good as I am and as much education as I have, there's stuff we don't see. When you work on something, especially through draft after draft after draft, we don't see what's really on the page anymore. We have an image in our head so often as writers of what's on the page. So having a second pair of eyes and a group of beta readers and an editor look at your work gives you the amount of feedback so you can catch so many of those little things and also correct things. I had one thing about my critique group, right? There was a moment they said Chris would never say that.
Uh-huh.
Chris would never say that. Your character would never say that. And so this group of people's invested in my work enough that they know what Chris would and wouldn't do. And they were right. And it was something that was a little author intrusion that was coming through. So those kind of things, I think you just don't, unless you have other people give you feedback on your work, editors and critique groups, you don't see some of that stuff. So
I admire your ability to do that, Greg. I'm not there yet. But on the other hand, bear in mind we've only got 1 or 2 chapters devoted to each character, and there isn't enough time to fully develop the character as would be if this were a character throughout the novel.
Right, it's not a character-driven novel per se.
So in that sense, it's different. And I suppose somebody can say that my characters are wooden or plastic, but I try to breathe as much life into them as possible, but I'm their creator. And it doesn't occur to me necessarily what they would do. I make them do what I want them to do.
Well, we're getting off track a little bit here of what we're supposed to be talking about, but I like both inputs on this. I like both Greg and Mitchell's input on it, because this is exactly what we're talking about, the difference between traditional vanity press and self-publishing. With traditional, you wouldn't have a chance to alter anything anyway. With vanity press, you wouldn't necessarily have a chance to alter it.
After the publishing. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
After the publishing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're self-publishing, you basically self-publishing, you own all the rights, you receive 100% of the profit. You have the ISBN, so it's in your name. You're the publisher. You have the digital files, but you're also responsible for the production work. You're responsible for the cover, whether you outsource it or not. You're responsible for the editing, whether you outsource it or not. You're responsible for you creating the size, everything about that book. You are the book. And
I don't know if Amazon will allow you to do this.
What's that?
But I suspect you can make up the name of a publishing company that absolutely does not exist. And
well, when you go for your ISBN, you are creating a publishing company.
Yeah, or you can use theirs.
Well, you can use theirs,
and you're published through CreateSpace. Which now, if you use your own, you have to do certain levels of your own distribution. But if you use Amazon's ISBN and you have CreateSpace as your publisher, you can actually now get into libraries, which through them doing the distribution.
Okay, but what he's talking about is let's say you use their ISBN through Amazon, which CreateSpace. Can you still put a publishing company's name in there?
You can as far as the catalog copy goes, what shows up on the page, but as far as the Bowker listing goes, the books in print listing goes,
it's going to say Amazon.
It's going to say CreateSpace.
Yeah.
So I mean,
now,
that's a level
Vanity,
of control that you have to decide what level of control you truly want.
Okay.
With either Vanity or self-publishing, you're going to have to do the copywriting, which isn't hard to do.
Yeah.
You're not required to do it. You can put the copyright notice on.
Right.
It's not like a trademark notice where you get into real trouble if you put an R in a circle on something and you haven't registered a trademark.
Right.
But you can put the C in a circle and the words copyright without registering it.
Right. Well, we've talked about that before. Yeah. Yeah, because there's a misconception that copyright means you have to copyright through the Library of Congress. No, all you're doing is registering your work to the Library of Congress. The copyright is from inception. So I think people do get confused a lot. We've talked about that before, how that's a little confusion there.
It comes up year after year after year after year at the writers' conference. Yeah.
So you're right, Mitchell. You don't have to go and get the copyright to produce the book. I actually have one out there right now, which I'm trying to take down because I am going to go back and register it, but it isn't registered. We say copyright, like Mitchell said, we have the C in there because it is. We from inception, but we haven't registered that.
And you can copyright under a pseudonym, and you may or may choose not to disclose your real name.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I write under a pseudonym.
Yeah.
I do the show under a pseudonym.
Yeah.
Everything in my life is in
a
my
pseudonym.
name. So.
Oh, it's in your name? Okay.
Everything, yeah.
I just don't want eggs coming through my front window.
Right. Yours is a politically motivated
Not
book.
everybody is going to like my book.
Right.
Okay, everybody likes my books on law, They're helpful to people. My book is helpful to people, but some people are going to disagree with it very strongly, and I don't need to have shots taken at me.
Yeah.
Right. I want to ask you something, though, Mitchell and Greg, and you probably know about this. On print on demand, which is what CreateSpace does, or Amazon, there are other places to go out there. And Mitchell, are you on print on demand with Ingram?
What's what?
Do you have your book listed with Ingram Sparks?
No.
Okay. When you distribute, how are you distributing your book?
The only way I'm distributing this particular book, Dying to Save America, is through Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, I use several different. I have a couple of my psychic books are through Lightning Source, which Ingram
Lighting Source is Ingram.
which Ingram bought.
Right.
So there's a level of distribution through there to pretty much all the markets.
Right.
But I also have worked with Draft to Digital, which gets you into Kobo and iTunes and half a dozen other smaller aggregates, which is a few of my novels are there, just sort of playing with the
And
idea
you
of
say
it.
Ingram and who else?
Yeah, I want to explain the difference between CreateSpace and Ingram Sparks. As of right now, I think Amazon's trying to create something through Kindle where they'll actually be publishing books as well.
That does exist now.
Oh, it does exist now.
does exist
Yeah,
now.
but with Ingram Sparks, Ingram is the largest distributor I think in the world now. They
Yeah.
were second. Now I think they're number one.
I think it goes back and forth between them and,
And
Barker.
Baker
and
Taylor.
Taylor.
But with Ingram Sparks, you can actually place your book on Ingram Sparks just like you do through CreateSpace. And what they do, though, is they distribute your book for you. So now you can go to the retailers like Barnes & Nobles or Books A Million, and they'll actually put your books in the store.
Some will.
Well, yeah, depends on the price and how
Here
it
in
looks,
Las
and
Vegas,
it's difficult.
they won't.
Yeah.
The Barnes & Nobles won't because it still shows up as a print-on-demand book even though it's coming through Ingram.
Well, I've had my books in there.
Oh, good.
And I have authors who've had their books in there. So, in fact, we know one of my authors right now has 2 books in there, and another person I know who's been on our show has his books in there. What happens with Ingram, the reason why Ingram Sparks is different than CreateSpace is Ingram Sparks, you don't make as much royalty on because they actually do a markup of 55% to the stores. They let the stores mark up 55%. In addition to that, they have a return policy. So as long as you check yes, returnable, now you can put your books in Barnes & Nobles. You can go do book signings there. If they choose to after the signing, they can keep the book in the store, which is usually only for 3 months. And if the book stays there more than 3 months, they're going to return it. But in any case, that's one way of getting your book into Barnes & Nobles and some of the bigger chains, which is not that many left anymore. With CreateSpace, they only have a 40% markup, or through Amazon. And so the problem there is the bigger chains don't want to carry your book in Barnes & Nobles because they can't mark it up as much. Plus, Amazon does not have a return policy. So since you can't return your book to Amazon, they don't want the book through Amazon because now if it's on the shelf for 3 months and doesn't sell, they cannot return it. There's good and bad to this. One, with Amazon, you never have to worry about a book being returned. Unfortunately, if you go through Ingram Sparks, which is the only way you can get your book into Barnes & Nobles, for example, after 3 months, if those books that are left in that store haven't sold, they're going to be returned to you. And when they're returned to you, you have to pay not only for what it costs to print the book through Lightning Source, which is the company that Greg just mentioned they own.
Now that's with who?
Well, Lightning Source. Well, they own Lightning Source now. Ingram Sparks bought the print-on-demand company Lightning Source. So when someone orders a book through Ingram Sparks, let's say Barnes & Nobles wants your book in the store, they will go online and order that book through through Lightning Source, which they own. So now you pay for the printing of what it costs to print that book through Lightning Source. You've got the distribution portion in there and shipping. When that book's shipped back to you 3 months later, if it didn't sell, you now have to pay all those costs and the shipping back to you.
And quite often the book is ruined, so you can't resell it anyway.
Most of the time. It has
coffee stains
right,
or dog-eared pages.
Yeah, dog-eared pages, right.
Yeah.
So, but the good thing is you got your book in Barnes & Nobles. So it's a good avenue if you want to look at it like I got my book in the Barnes & Nobles, but it's a bad thing if the books are left on the shelf after 3 months because they're going to be returned back to you. I don't tell anyone not to do that because I personally use Ingram myself. But what I've learned is when you do book signings, you have to be realistic. You have to be realistic as a self-published author that you're not going to make a fortune selling books at Barnes & Nobles or whatever on a personal note, doing the signings.
Right.
Because most authors are lucky to sell anywhere from 10 to 12 books at one sitting. I don't know what your experience with that is, Mitchell. Have you done book signings at the bookstores?
I have on the 2 trade published books.
Okay.
I didn't find that sold a lot of books.
Right.
Right.
Well, we had an
I know they
author.
sell radio and TV.
Uh-huh.
Did.
Okay. So, yeah. So that's
I
good
agree.
if you can get on.
I don't do book signings anymore.
You don't?
I just don't do them.
Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is if it's important to you to get your books on the shelves in Barnes & Nobles, then maybe that might be an avenue to look at with Ingram Sparks. If that doesn't matter to you, then possibly the best avenue is to go through someone like Amazon
Who is now building bookstores.
who are right, and they're getting. Well, actually, they realize they have to compete now with
Well,
Ingram Sparks.
they killed everybody.
Yeah,
That's what I
Yeah.
think. I think Amazon killed all the mom and pop stores. There's almost no bookstores left in the country. I mean, realistically, they're
Right.
gone.
Right.
And people like to look at a book and feel it and make a sale.
but
So
they
they're
did, also the bigger stores killed the mom and
well,
pops.
right.
yeah.
But if Amazon, we talked about that earlier in the show, it's doing almost 80% of the book business.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's where it's gone to. I love Amazon. I'm not.
Right, you're
I
not-
don't see
you're
them
not
as
right.
the evil empire. I'm just saying they were so successful they killed off all
Well,
these
they're
mom
no
and pop
different
shops.
than like your WalMarts or whatever. That put some of
Absolutely.
these-
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you have to go with the times. Times
Right.
are changing. But our point is we need to figure out a way to make sure our authors know where to go to get their books out there, and whether you use your own ISBN or you create your own company, because you can buy your own ISBNs through Bowker, and when you do that, you set yourself up as your own publisher.
Right.
So you don't have to use, Amazon's ISBN or Ingram Sparks ISBN, because you can do the same thing with Ingram Spark. You can actually own your own ISBN. I actually recommend that. I really do. I recommend that you set yourself up as your own entity, because it shows a little credibility when people are looking at your book to get them in their store, whether it's independent stores or the bigger stores even. Some people have used me as a way to say that I was published through my company. Just so that it shows credibility-wise, well, he's had these other books out here, and he's carrying this person's books as well. So, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to create your own company through an ISBN.
Yeah.
Bowker.
Yeah,
Go through
I think
Bowker.
it's might be worth mentioning. I recommend this book to everybody who's thinking about self-publishing. Is Peter Bowerman's The Well-Fed Self-Publisher?
Okay.
Which the book details in pretty approachable language how you set up a company, why you should have your own ISBN numbers or not, why you make those choices,
Right.
how you make choices about editing, how you make choices about production, and how you set up your company. So it's a really great
You
book
can
for
either-
authors.
Go ahead.
You
Richard.
can either get a book on how to form a limited liability company, LLC, which is very easy to do, cost you a little money, or you could make up. It could be a doing business as. In other words, I can run the North Carolina, let's say, a pizza company, and I don't need, as long as I don't put INC or LLC or CORP after the name. I'm simply doing business under an assumed name, and that's perfectly legal.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to register that with anybody.
Right. But we're talking about as far as when it comes to like Bowker and getting an ISBN, those are all the ISBNs are issued through Bowker. And whether you get it through Amazon or anyone else, they're issued through Bowker. They just buy them in bulk, and then they either give them to you or sell them to you. Whereas you can go to Bowker yourself and purchase your own ISBN and set yourself up as your own business. You don't even have to have a license to do that.
Right.
You're just registering yourself as I am James Kelly, and that could be my publishing company if I wanted to do that, through ISBN. So that's what we're saying. It costs a little bit. I think you can get one or two for like $125.
Yeah, it's like 10 for $350 or something.
10 for $350, yeah. But that is one way of setting yourself up as your own publisher.
The one thing I will say about it too, I love playing in the industry and seeing what's happening, and it's one of the reasons I think I have so many products out, because when something new happens, I want to try and
Right. See what
see
it's
what
like.
happens.
Yeah.
The one thing that, and I think you made the clarification, but it's you didn't say it big.
Okay.
Which is the average reader who's going to read your book could care less.
Oh, absolutely.
Could
yeah.
care less. It's not important to them at all. It's really about distribution and name recognition and control.
Right.
And that's really where the issue sits.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
Because
exactly.
ebooks, you don't even need an ISBN.
No.
Right. Especially if you're going through Amazon, they give it an AISN, their
Right.
own number
Right.
for their own distribution. So you could still give your book an ISBN, your ebook an ISBN, but it doesn't need one
It doesn't,
anymore.
right,
And
right.
it did at one point early on in the process.
I used to do that,
You
right.
had to have a different ISBN for every
Each
version.
avenue, whether
Yeah.
it's audio, video,
Right.
or anything.
And
yeah.
this is the difference with print on demand now too. You used to have to, if you were going to do a second edition, which it would be, if you went in and corrected your original text, it would become a second edition of the text. You would have to give it a new ISBN. And now with print on demand, you don't have to do that anymore. I mean,
Right.
that's some of the changes that are
Right.
happening.
Yeah. So keeping up with the industry is kind of important when
Yeah.
you're out there doing self-publishing.
Right. Well, and if it's your business, you
Yeah.
should know a little about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we're running out of time here, unfortunately. This has been a fun hour. All right. I would like to thank our guests, Mitchell Fronchen and Gregory A. Kompes, and again, my co-host, Janet Coursey. And
Oh, are you still here, Janet?
She's still here.
I am soaking this up.
Well,
Yes.
you can find a video of our past shows on youtube.com. Just go to youtube.com/aspects of writing. And also, if you go to our website, aspectsofwriting.com, you will find links to iHeartRadio, Roku TV, YouTube, and AMFM247.com. And all of our shows are archived on our website, aspectsofwriting.com. So again, Mitchell, thank you so much. Greg, thank you so much for being on the show.
Great being here. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Janet.
It's been a pleasure discussing Dying to Save America, and I thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. And again, until next week, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you, everyone.